Hello, I'm Blaine McCormick from the Handcamera School of Business at Baylor University, and welcome to part 2 of the Just Right video series, where we focus on helping you maximize the points on your Balanced Scorecard. This video deals with days of working capital, which I'm always asked about by my students who play the Foundation Business Simulation, and it's easy to master and manage, but you have to understand it. And so let's start with the target. This is the target that the Balanced Scorecard's wanting you to hit in Foundation. And you can see, just like on some other things, you can have too much days of working capital. Over 105 days would be too much. Likewise, you can have too little working capital. Less than 15 days would be too little. And what we want is to be just right here between 30 and 90 days of working capital. That's 1 to 3 months of working capital, and that's reasonable there. So that's the target. Let's try to understand what working capital does for us here. Here's your balance sheet, or a balance sheet. And there's two kinds of assets on your balance sheet. One, there's fixed assets, and fixed assets exist to generate wealth for the long term. The better your pool of fixed assets, which in Foundations your plant and equipment, the better your factory and capacity and automation, the better chance you have of generating wealth for the long term. But you also have current assets, and they're fundamentally different than fixed assets. Current assets help you manage uncertainty in the short term. It's hard to predict the future. It's hard to know just how many units you're going to sell or just how much cash you need round to round. And so current assets help you manage that variability there. So you don't want too much in your current assets. You don't want too little in your current assets. You want to be just right. And that's the idea. So to calculate days of working capital, here's the formula. You take your current assets and you subtract your current liabilities, and that gives you your spread, in what you have liquid there, what you have to manage this kind of uncertainty. And you divide that by daily sales, and that can tell you how many days you can go without a sale, which is a very useful number to know in Foundation, or if you're working with investors or creditors or things like that. So we take our current assets off the top of the balance sheet there in assets, and we plug them in there. Then we take our current liabilities at the bottom, we plug them in here, and notice that the current liabilities are just accounts payable and current debt. Long-term debt is a long-term liability, so it's not included in current liabilities. And so you take those two, take the difference between them, divide by daily sales, and you've got your days of working capital. So working capital is useful in avoiding two things. One, it helps you avoid emergency loans. If you run out of cash in Foundation, you take an emergency loan. They can be very expensive, and it's an avoidable tragedy doing that. Also, working capital helps you avoid stockouts, which are expensive in another way. Lost sales are expensive, or an opportunity, a missed opportunity there, and it can really hit your revenue line if you have customers who want to buy and you don't have the product. That's a bad thing. So emergency loans and stockouts is what you're trying to manage with your working capital. And again, you don't want too much, too little. You want to have just the right amount of working capital. So how much do you need? Is really the question there that you see the problem there. Well, again, full credit goes to those teams that have between 30 and 90 days of working capital, or can go 30 to 90 days without making a new sale and still survive on their operating, have enough assets, current assets to operate for 30 to 90 days. That's days of working capital. So let's just break down some common problems in early rounds and late rounds on days of working capital, and this might help you understand how to best manage this. So we're going to keep our formula down here at the bottom here, and I'll frame up the common problems there. In the early rounds, I see that teams struggle with having, they don't have enough days of working capital to go. So here's a nice bit of working capital right square in the green zone, but this is a very easy calculation. Let's say you have $10 worth of daily sales, and you have 1,000 in current assets and 500 in current liabilities, and so if you take the difference between those two, that'd be 500. Divide by 10, that'd give you 50 days of working capital. That's great, but in early rounds, teams struggle with two problems kind of getting liftoff here. Teams are too low on inventory, they're not making enough, or they're selling more than they expect, one of the two, or they're low on cash. And what this does is it hits your current assets, because that's inventory and cash. And so if your current assets drop, the spread between your current assets and current liabilities goes to $100. And if you have $10 of daily sales, that only gives you $10, 10 days of working capital, which puts you in the red zone for having too little. And so how you remedy this is you just get a little bit better at forecasting. Don't forecast the right amount, just right on the money. Make 1 to 2 months extra inventory. Get a little bit more optimistic in your forecasts. Not too optimistic, but a little bit more optimistic. And that keeps you from being low on inventory. A way that you can keep from running out of cash is to borrow current debt. You can get $3 to $5 million in current debt each round. You can get more than that, but I kind of recommend $3 to $5 million in current debt because I see just numerous teams each round that have emergency loans under $5 million, and if you just have an extra $5 million in the bank, sure, it costs you, $300,000 to $500,000 to carry that, but that's a pittance when it comes to paying off an emergency loan. And so bulking up on inventory and cash a little bit can help you manage low days of working capital in early rounds. In later rounds, it's a different problem. So let's go back to our ideal green zone team. Here we are again, back with 1,000 in current assets and 500 in current liabilities, $10 in daily sales for 50 days of working capital. Let's say in later rounds you get really flush with cash. And a lot of good teams do. So let's say your current assets start to expand to $2,500 in current assets, less 500 in current liabilities. So that's 2,000 is the spread between there, divided by 10. That's 200 days of working capital. Well, that's too much. You have more than 105 days, and so you're in the red zone on the other side because you've got way too much cash. It's an idle asset. Investors want to put that to use, or you need to be doing something other than sitting on it. And so you can do a variety of things, but I'll recommend a few here to manage. One, if you have too much cash and you need to lower that and get your working capital back in range, retire stocks or retire bonds, buy back stocks or retire long-term bonds is a great way to burn some cash in later rounds. Or you can start paying a dividend, set a dividend policy and start tossing that money out to shareholders. They're going to love you for it. Just make sure you're consistent in that. But those are a couple of ways. If you see too much cash on your balance sheet, which some can't imagine in early rounds, but in later rounds teams really start struggling with this, you can get your days of working capital back in line by doing those two moves there. How do you manage this? On your pro forma financial ratios there, you've got your pro forma income statement and balance sheet and things. Go to your financial ratios, pro forma financial ratios. You've got a couple of lines there that help you estimate your working capital and your days of working capital there, and just plug in your numbers and take a look there. And again, these are estimates, they're not actuals, but given the sales forecast and price points that you've given, this is what they project for your team, and so you can find some feedback there in the pro forma financial ratios. So that's days of working capital on the Balanced Scorecard. Again, you want to be just right. You don't want too much cash or too much inventory, or you don't want too little cash or too little inventory. You want to be just right here between 30 and 90 days of capital. So I hope that helps you manage your working capital on the Balanced Scorecard and succeed even more. Thanks for tuning in.